Welcome to episode 146 of the Lone Hockey Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about some standouts in last night's matchup between Ottawa and LA in LA. And really good game from LA. I felt like they have gotten a lot of scoring, a lot of secondary scoring from some of their guys who weren't necessarily supposed to be key players for them this year, but I feel like a lot of their guys have really stepped up this year and have played well. And one of those guys I actually want to talk about, and we'll start with LA, is Alex Laferriere. I've been tremendously impressed with him in year two from him. And a guy, ever since going from the USHL to college and then now here, and he just looks and fits this team's style of play so well and so seamlessly. It's really unsurprising to see what he's doing, I should say. I feel like now, and relative to when he was drafted and where he was drafted, I felt like at the time it would be a long shot for him in terms of his career and where he could end up in the NHL. And I wasn't necessarily expecting him to come and arrive this early and be a productive player this early in the league, but he's played really well and he's adapted really well to the league. And he's been a guy who brings that power game, but also that skill game. I've really noticed his skill continue to blossom and get better. He has a dual threat style game. His shot has been a notable aspect ever since he was draft eligible, but his playmaking has taken a major step forward. And I feel like that's been a major component to his success in the league and has just allowed him to continue to get better over time. And he's been a guy who's really fun to watch when he's playing at his best. And I feel like he's one of their more underrated secondary scorers as of late. And he's been very productive to start the season. And he was fun to watch. Kevin Fiala had a 2 point game, a goal and an assist. I felt like that's unsurprising from him, especially him being a guy who is a major component to this team ever since being acquired from Minnesota, relied upon as an 80 plus point winger every year and a point per game winger in the league every year now. So he's become a very productive player in the league and a very productive player for LA as well. I feel like there's a lot of components within his skill game and his hockey sense that really allow him to control pace and play in transition and also be able to be a guy who can maneuver in small areas, and he still has that checking ability. He checks and competes like he is playing his final game in the NHL. I feel like that's a notable quality of his. Some skill guys don't necessarily like to compete, but I feel like for him, given that at the start of his career, he was more of a bottom six type forward. I feel like that checking ability has just been a knack in terms of what he brings in his game, and there's just a natural instinct to be able to bring that night in, night out, which is really cool to see because sometimes you'd expect him to lay off the gas a little bit and not necessarily check as much. But I feel like with Fiala, he just brings that all around consistency, and it's really good to play. That's really good to see from a player like him as well. Vlad Gavrikov had a 2 point game, 2 assists, and was notable in transition, notable off the rush, notable in his outlet play. I feel like his passes were consistent, and he's taken a major step forward, especially with Drew Doughty being out. He's been relied upon heavily inside their top four, and a guy who isn't going to be the most productive as an offensive defenseman, but as a shutdown player and as a two-way player, he can bring some components that can really allow him to blossom in a top four role. Anze Kopitar, I really liked his ability to support low in this game. I felt like he was supporting plays low, he was supporting his goalie low, he was swinging low as a center. His routes were detailed and timed, but I noticed a lot of that come from the D zone, his D zone habits to break out. So transitioning from D zone to breakout to line rush, I feel like that's where he thrives in his routes and his timing. And a guy who's very consistent overall. He's been a very consistent player for them for a very long time. It's no surprise that he continues to uptick his offense and continue to maintain his offensive consistency as well. Trevor Moore had a 2 point game and a goal and assist for him as well. I noticed him up the wings, driving speed and being able to use that straight line speed off the rush and in neutral zone transitions. There's efficiency in his footwork. There's efficiency in how he transitions the puck, and those two, when they're interlinked together, they can be a dangerous combo, especially when a guy like Moore, he's a guy who's slightly niftier in terms of his puck skills and not necessarily super deceptive in terms of his handling skill, but at the same time, off the rush, he can use that speed and footwork to be able to accelerate and get past defensemen a little bit easier. So he's really relied upon there. I feel like he's relied upon as a guy who can thrive up the dot lane, and he actually thrives more outside the dot line than anywhere else, which is quite ironic sometimes. But a guy who continues to be a good complementary player for them inside more of a bottom nine role, but he plays that role well and he adapts that role well both offensively and defensively. And then I liked Adrian Kempe's game. I just noticed more of his offense. Phil Deneau, you notice his shutdown ability regularly as well. And I'm not really surprised with those two. Jordan Spence is a guy I really liked yesterday. Mobility, offensive acumen, the ability to walk the line, maintain heads up awareness, and uses subtle footwork and be able to play on top of the ice so that way he can maneuver and play on his toes, moving laterally, and also being able to use a little bit of deception here and there within his puck skill to not only walk the line, but be able to be consistent as a player in that sense as well. And offensively, he's continued to grow and get better. I feel like in transition, he's looked better this year as well. Looks more comfortable handling rushes, handling transitions individually as a puck carrier, and a guy who looks a little bit more polished defensively as well. I feel like last year you saw some spurts of him losing coverage and losing his man to man, but at the same time, there were some details in his game last year that were noticeable in terms of how he'd play stick on puck, how he'd defend using his feet, how he'd maintain gaps, and stuff like that. He's not the biggest defenseman, but it doesn't matter when you have the right reads, the right timing, and the right stick on puck ability. So I feel like with Spence, you notice that a lot more than anything else is his stick on puck play, his defensive play, and how he's able to incorporate those modern elements defensively. I really like his game. I feel like he's going to be a guy who can be very reliable as a two-way defenseman for them in the future and for a very long time. It's just more a matter of how consistent can he be now in the early stages of his career to get to that point so he can be a very consistent defenseman long term for them as well. Then on Ottawa's side, I didn't notice too many. I feel like their two goals really spoke volume about how they played outside of the 5-2 game. I just didn't feel like I noticed much from them. I noticed Jacob Bernard Docker. I felt like he was a guy who's noticeable in terms of puck movement, puck moving ability, and transition off the rush. And first pass out of the zone was clean. I feel like his first pass up ice was clean. He's making good lateral stretch passes when necessary, good breakout passes when necessary. And in terms of exit play, I thought he was detailed and noticeable from that sense. I didn't really notice him much else outside of that. I feel like those were the main areas that he stood out. Drake Batherson had a one assist game, and Drake Batherson was one of the few standouts for them offensively. And in terms of the forward group, I felt like Batherson was noticeable from the scoring perspective, playing interior, getting off the wall, being able to maneuver around the hash marks with the puck offensively, and just being able to create offense consistently as well. And then Tim Stützle, who actually almost could have been drafted by LA when we think about where he was drafted. And in comparison to Quentin Byfield. But at the same time, Stützle had a really good game. I felt like he was another really big standout. He's been noticeable every single time I've watched him, and every time I turn on Ottawa, I notice Stützle and his ability to be a play driver and be all over the ice, be able to be very engaged in that sense. I feel like that's a really good quality when it comes to his is how he can control play and actually be a puck possession driver every single shift now when he's on the ice and he's playing top line ish minutes. So that certainly helps as well. But those are a few standouts. I didn't notice too many from Ottawa, but they definitely needed to play a better game in this one for sure.